One of the features of mythology throughout human history is the use of symbols and symbolism to represent the various gods and goddesses and the many heroes. For example, if you were to see a man dressed in the skin of a lion, you would more than likely identify him as Hercules, or Heracles as he is known in ancient Greece. If you were to see a hero or figure with winged sandals, that could perhaps be one of two people. It could be the god Hermes, who was the god of speed and the great messenger of the gods, or it could be Perseus, who made use of the winged sandals of Hermes as part of his defining quest to seek out the head of Medusa. Speaking of Hermes, one popular symbol, even down to today, is called the wand of Hermes, which is an unusual symbol because it's a wand in kind of a cruciform. It's topped off by a pair of wings, but it's also intertwined with two serpents, which is an unusual symbol because the serpents are traditionally, mythologically, the antagonist of humanity. But in the case of the wand of Hermes, it's a wand that has healing powers. And over the centuries, it has come down to symbolize the medical profession. One of the symbols of the medical profession is the wand of Hermes. Whereas snakes were antagonistic to humanity, at least mythologically, this symbol, however, is one of healing. But it's not the only one that we see in the Bible itself, in the Old Testament, specifically in the book of Numbers. When the people cry out against Moses and God, God sends seraph serpents to bite and sting the people so that many of them died. When the people cry out in anguish to Moses, he turns to God, who commands him to make a bronze serpent and place it on a pole. Here again, we have the serpents antagonizing the people of Israel in the desert, just as it was a source of temptation for Adam and Eve. But the bronze serpent placed on a pole, anyone who looked at it was healed. So again, a symbol involving an antagonist to humanity is now a symbol of healing, and very, very similar, not exact, but similar to the wand of Hermes. Where the wand of Hermes, it was two serpents on a wand. This was a pole with one bronze serpent. And both are symbols of healing. Another example of a very antagonistic symbol is that of the cross or crucifixion, arguably one of the most horrible and torturous ways of execution devised by humanity, by empires and nations. And yet we, as followers of Christ, see it as a symbol of salvation and healing and an end to death, a triumph over death. We wear it around our neck. We place it on our wall. And when you think about it, we don't do that with a guillotine or a hangman's noose, but a symbol of execution and oppression of the Roman Empire has become for us a symbol of salvation and a defeat over death. And we have various other such symbols of our faith in the Scriptures and throughout our history that represent various people, institutions, various themes. And it's important for us to know what those symbols are and how those identifiable features play in identifying various individuals, especially saints of the early years of our church's history, people who we don't have pictures of, and yet the symbols represent who they are. For example, if you were to see a young woman with a veil, more often than not, that would be the Blessed Virgin Mary, and especially if in more recent centuries she's holding a rosary. If we see a person, whether it's a small boy or a grown man, dressed in camel's hair, but especially with a thin staff that's topped off by a cross, whether it's a grown man or a small boy, that would identify that person as John the Baptist. We have symbols of the apostles. For example, if you saw a middle-aged or old man holding a pair of keys, one gold, one silver, we would identify that person as St. Peter. Or maybe a middle-aged man with a red cloak and holding a sword, that would be St. Paul. Just look at the four evangelists. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are symbolized in the man or the angel, a man with wings, symbolizing Matthew. Mark is symbolized with the lion. Luke is symbolized by the ox, and John is symbolized in the eagle. These symbols correspond to the four living creatures that we see of in the book of Revelation surrounding the throne of heaven, and they correspond to symbols and images and visions that were seen by the prophet Ezekiel in his book. But we identify those four, especially if they're holding a book, these four animals, these four living creatures, as symbolic of the four evangelists, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Other saints, for example, if we see a young girl holding a lamb and a reed, those are typical symbols of St. Agnes. We see a man carrying a baby on his shoulder. That is a typical image of St. Christopher. If we see a young woman with two eyes on a plate, that is a typical symbol of St. Lucy. And even not just the early centuries of Christianity, but we see a man dressed in a Franciscan robe with a stigmata. We immediately identify him as St. Francis of Assisi. Another person dressed as a Franciscan, but holding a book and a child, identify him as St. Anthony of Padua. A man with a great white beard holding 3 bags of coins or 3 balls symbolize St. Nicholas of Myra. And we have other such symbols throughout our church's history and among the saints and other figures of the scriptures and in our church's history. And so it's important to recognize the symbolism that we see within our faith and perhaps be renewed in learning about what those symbols are. How are certain saints identified? How do we understand certain themes in our church? Not just the medical profession, which comes from mythology, but other symbols that come from our faith, in which we can recognize the identity of certain individuals, certain biblical figures, because of the symbols that accompany them. So just as we see in the reading for this Tuesday of the 5th Sunday of Lent, the story of the bronze serpent, let us be renewed in the other symbols of our faith so that we can recognize the very elements of our faith and the various people, both biblical and throughout our history, who are identified by symbols that are closely associated with those particular people, with their particular religious orders, with their lives, and especially with their examples of holiness.